Welcome to Tidbit Talkin. This is a series that consists of spewing out assorted thoughts which arose from somebody who thinks too much, taking in, and generally loving entertainment media by the boatload. These tidbits may be mini theories, observations, or simply jokes. Hopefully people will find them entertaining or at least interesting. And who knows, maybe they'll inspire others to look at what amuses them in different ways than before. Also bear in mind that everything blabbed about in these videos are from the perspective of somebody who's experienced every main story bit connected with whatever works currently being gone over. So spoilers are a definite. However, other works set in a shared continuity will typically solely be referenced in a way that only makes sense to anybody who's also fully experienced those ones up until their same time occurring points. Sort of a coded nod kind of deal. So, while things will be more fun for viewers who've indulged with an entire universe's works, nobody who has yet to do so will get non-experienced events spoiled. Now, with all of that out of the way, here we go. Going rogue. Felicity mentions that she hacked into the Starlab satellite on occasion, and at least due to a technicality, it may not just be her doing that. Chances are even Team Flash may be accessing it illegally, or at least unofficially, since Starlab's being deemed a Class 4 hazardous location may have also led to its research satellites being forced out of commission by making them move to graveyard orbit. Dawn isn't just worried about Barry getting hurt or killed by the cold gun before any 15-long-year plan time travel involving schemes are able to be carried out. He's also concerned with his intended timeline getting messed up in general, as always. In the history Dawn's familiar with, Snart may have developed his cold gun himself. Thus, there's worry about a certain big Central City criminal group completely forming too early. That scenario would also be troublesome even if the Flash's history remained on track, at least from Dawn's end, because if Barry must fight so many rogues early on in his career, he may have to learn too many speedster tricks for Eobard's liking. The cold gun requiring firmware updates makes sense because its computer systems likely need to be precisely aware of current environmental temperatures so unnecessary power doesn't get used when making everything considerably less toasty. Not holding back a little bit when things were already kinda chilly would make the weapon much less efficient after all. Plastique. Bet's explosive powers probably have some sort of cooldown period between uses. Thus, she's able to avoid blowing up stuff like her clothes, despite not possessing ability control yet. All she has to do is blow up something relatively small and useless every once in a while, like say a lawn dart. Then voila, safe wallet grabbing can commence. Bet's death likely resulted in an explosion because her current charge became even more uncontrollable due to brain activity fading away before the release could happen. In other words, the post-mortem blast she emitted was like an extreme version of decapitated chickens running around for a little bit. Caitlin may have discovered how to make 500 proof alcohol by studying medication doses for animals much larger than humans like rhinos or at least giraffes, and figuring out things from there. Alternatively, if Caitlin didn't concoct a liquid meant to intoxicate creatures roughly 2.5 times bigger than what's medically considered an average human size, she made one that could cause alcohol poisoning much faster if consumed by non-metas. The Flash is born. Barry likely doesn't swallow any bugs when running. Caitlin and Cisco clearly didn't take the Flash's accelerated reflexes and thought speed into account during their argument. Dawn's amusement at the situation thus goes deeper than merely finding their discussion pointless and sarcasm-based snark-worthy. Team Flash's computer simulation can't correctly predict the force of Barry's supersonic punch, nor his capacity to survive using it, because nobody at Star Labs other than Dawn knows about anything Speed Force related yet. Thus, they can only calculate their plan's outcome based on what would happen to creatures and materials not protected by an aura made up of extra-dimensional energy that rewrites all physical laws depending on its user's intentions. Dawn mentions that Tess could have built the particle accelerator in 4 years. In the 2020 timeline, Star Labs was obviously still in Central City alongside Barry. Otherwise, he wouldn't have become all Speed Force empowered when things got dimension-ripping explosion-ridden. This means their work probably started sometime in 2016, which would be around when the League of Assassins invaded Star City if Arrow-related things still occurred in a roughly identical manner. That seems like a pretty good reason for them to move. The first time Dawn displays speedster abilities during this new earlier Flash creation having history is shortly after Barry received his official superhero moniker. Dawn's present power possessing probably kicks in whenever things are looking like his intended future will come to pass. Hence why the Flash officially debuting in a public fashion helps him get all red glowing eye having again for a while. Dawn threatens Iris instead of Jo when attempting to stop the good detective's investigation because he knows that going after her would upset Barry more. Ol' Eobard can't miss a chance to engage in his favorite hobby after all. Power outage. If the 2024 newspaper is somehow vital to Thawne for a reason other than reading it started his Flash obsession, which eventually resulted in certain reverse-themed identities coming about, then he probably cares about maintaining Barry's eventual death, because killing that guy any other way hasn't worked out thus far. The 2024 newspaper change isn't a direct result of Barry's present powerlessness problem. Rather, it comes about because Thawne's current Make Mr. Allen More Like Me training method doesn't create any future Flashes with enough confidence to truly become fully Speed Force connected. This no heroic behavior policy, of course, screws everybody over for a good while later, because said sturdy super self-support is what's necessary for Barry's full recovery after he receives his treadmill-induced jumper cable therapy. Even if Barry did regain some speed later on, he may not have grown strong enough to effectively perform his 2024 feats, or even try being a regularly active hero, thus preventing the newspaper's restoration. Clock King may have been granted a prison transfer as some type of reward for snitch-related activity. After all, his nigh meta-human level of analytical skill would make figuring out other inmates' behavioral patterns a cinch. Clock King probably deemed all of this necessary, as a transfer would be his only chance to escape. Most prison break plans tend to involve friends on either the inside or outside, a department that Mr. Hourglass Sans Are My Gods was sorely lacking in, so he really had no other option. When Farouk chokes on the Flash near this episode's end, it's because he's not just absorbing whatever electrical energy is currently in Barry, but also reaching into the Speed Force and leeching off it directly. Farouk was only able to completely drain Barry early on in the episode because his Speed Force connection was incomplete, thus only a little bit more overclocked electricity than what initially got thrust into him by that supernatural lightning strike was present inside him back then. Barry's partial denial of what happened to him basically put a filter on his Speed Force connection that only let nearly incomprehensible power bits drip through until he became more comfortable as the Flash. The solidified Speed Force connection Barry develops while fighting Farouk seems to be what stops his normal clothing from burning up while he runs, as that doesn't really happen after this point. In other words, a certain kind of protective aura suddenly came into play. There are, of course, a few exceptions to this standard suit surviving super speed strolling shortly after Barry's amazing ability acceptance, like when he's distracted while showing off and burns up others' clothing, but otherwise, Flash going about his business-related things remain completely accidental jog blaze free. On a related and much tinier note, Barry seems to move on from that somewhat weak-looking yellow lightning from this episode onward, as his standard orange-gold stuff more or less appears immediately after these events and never fades away. Finally, the last bit about this spectacular super speed source saturation supplying situation is that Barry appears to have a rather easy time dodging lightning afterwards. It seems like the activation of his Speed Force aura allows him to subconsciously convert a bit of any unavoidable electricity into Speed Force energy. Alternatively, Barry's complete Speed Force connection lets him absorb normally harmful electricity doses because regular humans have incredibly tiny amounts of the stuff within them anyway, and his greatly accelerated physiological processes just deal with larger servings, one bit at a time, nigh instantaneously. Flash versus Arrow. Thing likely believes that, if the Flash is real, he was responsible for whisking Child Barry away from Nora's murder. That's why he's not too keen on letting Eddie investigate the Scarlet Speedster at this episode's beginning. Felicity's nonsensical comment about Central City having the highest concentration of iron oxide in the country was just an excuse to go see Barry. It's likely, one way or another, she just heard about the Flash running over water. This little fact, coupled with finding a boomerang, made her wonder if it's possible for Barry to reach Australia on foot. Felicity doesn't suggest this on her own because she's hoping Barry would just eagerly jump to that idea by himself. Thus, she made up a stupid reason for showing up by stringing together a few unnecessarily scientific-sounding statements and hoped that no one would catch on. It's likely that Oliver and Diggle knew she was uttering nonsense too, but they also wanted to see Barry because of concern and curiosity, respectively. Barry's powers aren't really making him experience built-up rage, rather he's getting over the anger of one thing quickly and rapidly moving on to something else. His super-fast mental-emotional processing is acting as a very sharp, double-edged sword this this episode. Barry seems to reflexively phase the tranquilizer out of his body, despite not knowing that's even a thing he can do yet. Given that even non-super folks sometimes shake quite a bit when excessively frustrated, it's likely his unnaturally agitated state, coupled with this seemingly life-threatening scenario, caused a reflexive power use that couldn't occur consciously yet. Alternatively, extreme emotions play no part in this unknown complicated maneuver usage, but rather his own body's incredible desire to not have to expel all that vile substance out via pooping or vomiting led to this. Singh's opinion of the Flash seems to flip around during this episode's ending segments. This may be because he's starting to think the guy's actually Nora's true murderer as opposed to young Barry's savior. After all, a little kid could have easily mixed up the colors of lightning and blurs when only 2 different ones were involved and everything was faster than what any normal human could keep up with. The brave and the bold. Cisco installed that minicam in Barry's emblem after Flash vs. Arrow's events just so he could get verification regarding whether or not mind control related junk was involved whenever the guy started acting suspicious. The man in the yellow suit. Dawn doesn't phase to get the tachyon prototype because with his inconsistent speed, it may be too difficult a maneuver, if only because doing so requires using lots of a certain force. Of course, there's also a fair chance that Dawn could wind up stuck in whatever he's trying to travel through and or even get shredded into gooey organ bits if his powers faded during the attempt. Mercury Labs' prototype tachyon device didn't get stolen before Christmas for at least one more reason on top of it needing to be in a usable state. Dawn was most likely using his brief moments of super speed having before the hyperparticle heist to install all those cameras he used in his spying. On that note, the West household surveillance may have been put in while Reverse Flash was destroying all of Joe's evidence and threatening to murder Iris. Dawn's anger over Firestorm may be due to him not knowing Ronnie and Stein were currently active, as such a huge oversight would mean he didn't install enough security cameras. After all, even with everything he knows, the Flash having surprise allies obviously makes all his manipulating a fair bit more difficult. Revenge of the Rogues. Barry decides he must destroy the drone during his training rather than figure out how to evade its missile fire because getting wrecked by Reverse Flash twice has made him realize that skillful and creative use of speedster powers is absolutely vital for fighting opponents. Dawn isn't truly concerned about Barry getting defeated by Captain Cold or losing interest in training. Rather, he's worried that the guy will wind up with another main nemesis. The general bad guy pettiness is especially prevalent here because Dawn despises all rogue-related things. Snart and Rory likely never use their weapons at full power all throughout the series. Captain Cold, of course, doesn't want any unwanted attention from unnecessary killing, and that's a much easier goal to reach when they're not leaving behind environments with air temperatures multitudes lower or higher than any other nearby area. There's also an issue with running out of fuel or whatever, and being left defenseless in situations where unexpected factors come into play. The heat gun's creation likely came about because somebody at another company decided to make a machine capable of reaching Planck temperature after hearing about and or just piecing together that Star Labs was creating tech that could achieve absolute zero. There's practically no way Cisco had all of the items available to even attempt making such a device just lying around beforehand, nor would knowledge about literal highest extreme temperature manipulation already be embedded within his brain, as that's not really general engineering information. So he must have contacted several different manufacturers and specialists during the Cold Gun's creation process, and at least one of them figured out what he was going for and deduced how to do the opposite based on his plans. Perhaps one of the folks Cisco contacted was even somebody who worked on Stein's Firestorm project. After all, Jason Rush did mention a brick wall being melted. Even though all that work was for a transmutation project, it's not like the findings couldn't be messed with in order to figure out simple, ridiculous heat creation. Thawne's comment about Ghostbusters being surprisingly quite scientifically accurate could be an instance of him secretly mocking everybody else, as he already knew about the more supernatural aspects of their world. At the very least, him looking into Green Arrow's history during Flash vs. Arrow would result in finding out about Lazarus Pits, if he didn't already know about mystical things before, from encountering some magic-related hero or villain. The Sound and the Fury. Dawn may be relentlessly hard on Hartley, not only due to how the guy could ruin his intentionally failing accelerator-related plans, but also because he hates all Rogue's associated folks, which typically includes Pied Piper. Connected with this, Dawn may have hired Cisco because the guy could develop powers that are basically much more powerful versions of Hartley's sound-based weaponry, at least in a same end result sort of way. There's also a good chance that Eobard hired Mr. Ramon merely because it would annoy one of the Rogues, as that's just how he rolls. Hartley's jealousy over Barry being Wells' new #1 son is rather funny because the guy is really Eobard Thawne, someone who actually does favor Mr. Allen in a very special way. Thawne won't take any more questions at the press conference after revealing Hartley's warning about a massive particle accelerator related disaster being likely and his subsequent neglect of it because Wells not seriously considering this information important wasn't original timeline present. Eobard likely caved and answered Iris's Mason mimicking question because him not responding to someone who knew his current associates would be even more intended future detrimental. Hartley had probably been spying on Star Labs since the explosion occurred and only decided to confront them once he had Ronnie Raymond related leverage to help ensure his victory or at least an emergency escape. He would have found out about Ronnie being alive when Reversed Flash got blasted by Firestorm and then looked into everything else following that. Crazy for you. Thawne pushing Barry to rest after a Flash save quota gets fulfilled isn't just him tightening the Wells illusion by feigning/showing concern, he's also making sure that speed increases for his lifelong love-hate obsession target turned ignorant protege remains sufficient via necessary break enforcing. After all, Barry still needs to eat and sleep like a normal person, albeit much more than most for the former, so chances are he still gains strength in an identical manner. Peekaboo would only have the Flash's lightning to move towards if she tried using her powers in that darkened tunnel, hence why Shauna just sat there after Barry's whack-a-bulb game. Endings are a pain, but all of you are fantastic. See ya.